For simple projects like scarves and blankets, it's pretty easy to improvise a pattern if you find a stitch you really love. In many cases, as long as you know the stitch multiple, you can make a foundation chain that's as wide as you want the project to be, and it's just that simple. But if you've ever tried that approach with a ripple or a chevron stitch, or any other stitch with a wave like these, you've probably found out the hard way that it just doesn't work for these stitches. Chevrons and ripples are unique in that the finished row will always be shorter than the foundation chain itself. The amount it shrinks, though, depends on the stitch pattern. So in order to improvise a pattern with one of these wonderful stitches, you have to do a little planning first. The first thing you need to know is the stitch multiple. If you're using a stitch book or an online tutorial, you can usually always find this information somewhere in the pattern notes. Let's use this classic ripple stitch as an example. This one has a multiple of 14 plus 3, which means the foundation chain is made up of groups of 14, and then you add 3 to the end. So the goal right now is to find out how wide a single repeat is. The best way to do that is to start by chaining the multiple, so 14 in this case, and then add 3 to the end. And then work the first row as the pattern states. Now we'll measure from one end to the next, taking the measurement in the middle of the row and being as exact as you possibly can. This one measures about 3.25 inches with the hook size I chose. It's also worth mentioning that you should use the yarn and the hook size that you want to use for your project. Now let's say you want to make a scarf that's about 9 inches wide. Divide 9 by 3.25 to get 2.77. So that tells you two things. One, that you need 3 repeats, or 3 groups of 14 chains, for a scarf that's about 9 inches wide. And 2, it'll be just a tiny bit wider than 9 inches because the calculation is slightly lower than 3. In this case, this portion of the number is higher than 5, so I like to round up to 3, and that'll get me slightly closer to that 9-inch target. The big takeaway here is that the math doesn't always work out perfectly, and in some cases, that's okay. Here's another little example. Let's say you want to make a blanket that's 50 inches wide. Divide 50 by 3.25, and you'll get 15.38, which remember is the number of repeats you need for the width. So 15 groups of 14 for the stitch pattern. Now in this case, since our number is 15.38, I personally would round down and make it 15 groups of 14 chains, knowing it'll be just slightly smaller than 50 inches wide. And that's perfectly okay for a blanket or any other project where the size isn't critically important. For clothing though, you need it to be more exact, and in that case, it's best to adjust your hook size up or down and measure again. So for a panel that needs to measure 15 inches wide, I would drop down a hook size so the initial measurement is exactly 3 inches, because 3 divides evenly into 15, not 3.25. So basically, for projects where the size is important, the measurement you make needs to divide evenly into the desired width. For all other projects, you can round up or round down as you see fit. So let's go back to our scarf example, and since we know the smaller hook size yields a repeat that's 3 inches exactly instead of 3.25, we use that to crochet 3 groups of 14 plus 3, so 45 chains to start with. And just to prove this actually works, here are 45 chains, and here is the measurement after working the first row. Just about right smack on that 9-inch mark, like I would expect. Now it's your turn. Check out this video to see how to crochet this classic ripple stitch and work through these basic steps to practice, even if it's just a swatch you make. These skills will be really valuable if you think you'll make a project with a wave stitch pattern of any sort anytime in the future. Happy hooking, and I'll see you in the next one.